The rain hammered against the tall windows of the Madison Avenue penthouse as Maria Santos adjusted her worn apron and glanced at the clock. It was nearly midnight, and she had been working for 16 hours straight. Her dark hands, weathered from years of cleaning and cooking for wealthy families, trembled slightly as she wiped down the marble countertop one final time. Maria had been working as a housekeeper for the wealthy Harrison family for 3 months now. Richard Harrison was a tech billionaire who had made his fortune developing cutting-edge software that revolutionized how hospitals managed patient care. His wife, Catherine, was a former fashion model who now spent her days attending charity galas and spa appointments. They lived in a world so different from Maria's humble background in Guatemala that sometimes she felt like she was working on another planet. The job paid well enough to send money back to her sick mother and support her own 2 children who lived with her sister in Queens. Maria had learned to navigate the complex world of the ultra-wealthy, understanding that her role was to remain invisible while ensuring their lives ran smoothly. She knew which imported coffee beans Mr. Harrison preferred for his morning espresso, how Mrs. Harrison liked her silk blouses pressed with lavender water, and exactly how to arrange the fresh orchids that arrived weekly from the florist. But tonight felt different. Tonight there was a tension in the air that made Maria's stomach twist with unease. She had noticed it building for weeks, the way Mr. Harrison's jaw clenched when he spoke to his wife, how Mrs. Harrison's laughter sounded forced and brittle, the way they barely looked at each other during the rare meals they shared at home. As Maria gathered her cleaning supplies to head to the service elevator, a sound stopped her in her tracks. It was faint at first, almost lost beneath the sound of the storm outside, but unmistakable, the desperate cry of a baby. She paused, listening intently. The Harrisons had no children. Mrs. Harrison had mentioned once in passing that they had decided to focus on their careers instead of starting a family. The crying grew louder, more urgent. It seemed to be coming from the direction of the master suite. Maria hesitated, knowing that the family's private quarters were strictly off-limits when they were home. But the sound of that infant's distress tugged at something deep inside her maternal heart. She had raised 4 children of her own and recognized the particular cry of a baby who was hungry, scared, and desperately in need of comfort. Setting down her supplies, Maria quietly made her way down the long hallway, her soft-soled shoes silent on the imported Italian marble. The crying was definitely coming from behind the heavy oak doors of the master bedroom. She pressed her ear against the cool wood, her heart racing. Mixed with the baby's wail, she could hear muffled voices, Mr. and Mrs. Harrison arguing in harsh whispers. "I can't do this, Richard." Mrs. Harrison's voice was sharp with panic. "I don't know anything about babies. I can't even keep a houseplant alive. Catherine, please, just try to calm her down." Mr. Harrison's voice was strained with exhaustion. "The nanny doesn't start until Monday, and she's been crying for hours." "Her? This is temporary, remember? We discussed this. The adoption agency will find her a proper family." Maria's breath caught in her throat. An adoption? There was a baby in that room who needed care, and the wealthy couple who could afford anything in the world seemed completely lost. The crying intensified, and Maria could hear the desperation in those tiny lungs. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to help. She knew she should walk away, pretend she heard nothing, finish her work, and go home to her small apartment in Queens. Getting involved in her employer's personal affairs could cost her the job she desperately needed. But as the baby's cries grew more frantic, Maria thought of her own children, of her granddaughter back in Guatemala, of every baby she had ever soothed with gentle hands and a warm heart. Before she could stop herself, Maria knocked softly on the door. The arguing stopped immediately, and the baby's cries seemed to echo even louder in the sudden silence. "Who is it?" Mr. Harrison's voice was sharp with surprise. "It's Maria, sir. I was finishing the kitchen when I heard. I thought perhaps I could help." There was a long pause, then the sound of footsteps. The door opened to reveal Richard Harrison, his usually perfectly styled hair disheveled, his expensive silk shirt wrinkled and stained. Behind him, Maria could see Mrs. Harrison pacing near the floor-to-ceiling windows, holding a tiny bundle that seemed to squirm and fight against her awkward grip. "Maria, Mr. Harrison began, then stopped, running his hands through his hair. "This is complicated." The baby's cries reached a fever pitch, and Mrs. Harrison's face crumpled with frustration and tears. "She won't stop crying, Richard. I've tried everything. I fed her, I changed her diaper, I've been walking with her for hours. Maria looked past Mr. Harrison to the scene behind him. Mrs. Harrison was holding the baby stiffly, away from her body, as if the child was made of something that might break or explode. The infant, who couldn't have been more than a few weeks old, was red-faced and clearly exhausted from crying. "May I?" Maria asked gently, stepping forward with her arms extended. Mrs. Harrison didn't hesitate. She practically thrust the baby toward Maria, relief flooding her face. "Please, I don't know what I'm doing wrong." The moment the tiny infant settled against Maria's chest, something magical happened. Maria's body remembered the ancient rhythm of caring for a baby, the gentle swaying motion, the soft humming that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her soul, the way to hold a child so they felt completely safe and loved. The baby's cries began to soften almost immediately. Maria could feel the tiny body relaxing against her, the frantic breathing beginning to slow. She looked down into a pair of beautiful dark eyes that were still bright with tears but no longer filled with panic. "There, little one," Maria whispered in Spanish, then repeated in English for the parents' benefit. "It's okay now. You're safe." As the baby's cries faded to soft sniffles and eventually to peaceful silence, Maria became aware that both Mr. and Mrs. Harrison were staring at her in amazement. In the space of just a few minutes, she had accomplished what they had been unable to do for hours. "How did you?" Mrs. Harrison began, her voice filled with wonder. Maria smiled softly, still gently swaying with the now quiet baby. "Sometimes they just need to feel loved," she said simply. "This little one is hungry for more than milk. She needs to feel safe, to know that someone cares for her." The room fell quiet except for the sound of rain against the windows and the baby's soft, even breathing. In that moment, Maria realized that this night was going to change everything. As Maria continued to hold the peaceful baby, Mr. Harrison sank into one of the leather chairs near the fireplace, his head in his hands. Mrs. Harrison stood by the window, her arms wrapped around herself as if trying to hold her emotions together. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. "We should explain," Mr. Harrison finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't... We aren't... She's not ours," Mrs. Harrison finished, her voice hollow. "We're just keeping her temporarily." Maria continued to rock the baby gently, waiting for them to continue. She had learned that sometimes the wealthy needed space to tell their stories, that pushing too hard for information could make them retreat behind their walls of privacy. "Catherine's sister died in a car accident 3 weeks ago," Mr. Harrison said, his words coming slowly as if each one was painful to speak. "She was a single mother, no other family except Catherine." Mrs. Harrison turned from the window, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. Jennifer was only 22. She was trying so hard to make it on her own, working 2 jobs while raising Emma. She gestured toward the baby in Maria's arms. "I barely knew her. We weren't close. I was too busy with my life to pay attention to my little sister's struggles." Maria felt her heart breaking for all of them, for the young mother who had lost her life, for the sister drowning in guilt, for the baby who had lost everything she had ever known. She looked down at little Emma, whose tiny fist had curled around Maria's finger as she slept. "The state called us because Catherine was listed as the emergency contact," Mr. Harrison continued. "We had 2 choices. Take Emma in or let her go into the foster care system while they searched for adoptive parents." "We don't know anything about children," Mrs. Harrison said, her voice breaking. "Our lives aren't set up for this. Richard works 18-hour days. I have commitments, responsibilities. We travel constantly for business. This penthouse isn't baby-proofed. We don't have cribs or car seats or any of the things a baby needs." Maria nodded, understanding. She could see how overwhelming this situation would be for people who had never experienced the daily reality of caring for a child. "What will happen to her?" she asked softly. "The adoption agency says they can probably place her within a few weeks," Mr. Harrison replied. "There are many couples looking for healthy infants. She'll go to a good family, people who are prepared for parenthood, who have been planning and preparing for years. It's what's best for her," Mrs. Harrison added, but Maria heard the uncertainty in her voice. Maria looked around the opulent room, at the priceless artwork on the walls, the cashmere throws draped over Italian furniture, the fresh flowers that cost more than many families spent on groceries in a month. She thought about her own cramped apartment where she had raised 4 children, where love had been abundant even when money was scarce. Have you been caring for her alone these 3 weeks? Maria asked. Mrs. Harrison nodded miserably. We hired a day nurse, but she was cold. Professional, but cold. Emma cried constantly when she was here. The night nurse quit after 2 days, said Emma was difficult. We've been taking shifts, but neither of us knows what we're doing. She's been eating, but barely, Mr. Harrison added. The formula the hospital recommended doesn't seem to agree with her. She spits up constantly, and she hardly sleeps more than an hour at a time. Maria frowned, gently feeling Emma's tiny stomach through her onesie. The baby was too thin, and Maria could feel the tension in her little body even as she slept. What formula are you using? Mrs. Harrison retrieved a can from the dresser, and Maria examined it with concern. It was an expensive organic brand, but Maria could see immediately that it wasn't the right choice for a baby with a sensitive stomach. This is too rich for her, Maria said gently. See how her little belly is hard? She's having trouble digesting it. My youngest grandson had the same problem. There are gentler formulas that work better for sensitive babies. She looked at the Harrisons, both watching her with desperate hope in their eyes. May I ask, who has been preparing her bottles? The day nurse, mostly, Mrs. Harrison replied. Sometimes Richard or I try, but we follow the instructions on the can exactly. Maria nodded, understanding the problem. Formula is not just about following instructions. Each baby is different. The temperature must be just right, not too hot, not too cold. The way you hold the bottle, the way you help them burp, these things matter very much. As if to prove Maria's point, Emma stirred in her arms and made a soft, hungry sound. Without thinking, Maria began to hum a gentle lullaby her own mother had sung to her decades ago in Guatemala. The baby settled immediately, turning her face toward Maria's chest with the instinctive seeking motion of a hungry infant. She's hungry, Maria said, but if I may suggest, let me prepare the bottle. I think I can help her feel better. Mrs. Harrison nodded eagerly and led Maria to a small kitchenette that had been set up in the adjoining sitting room, specifically for the baby's care. Maria was shocked by what she saw. Multiple opened cans of formula, dirty bottles in the sink, and a general disorganization that spoke of desperation rather than neglect. With practiced efficiency, Maria began to clean and sterilize a bottle while explaining what she was doing. The water must be the perfect temperature, she said, testing it on her wrist. Too hot will burn her mouth, too cold will upset her stomach. And see how I'm mixing the formula? Gentle circles, no shaking. Shaking creates bubbles that give babies gas. As she worked, Maria found herself thinking about her own children when they were babies, about the intuitive knowledge that had come from necessity and love. She thought about the young mother who had died, wondering if she too had struggled with these basic tasks, if she had anyone to teach her the small secrets that made caring for a baby easier. There, Maria said, cradling Emma in one arm while holding the bottle. Now watch how I hold her. Her head must be higher than her stomach, see? This helps prevent gas and makes swallowing easier. Emma latched onto the bottle immediately, her tiny hands reaching up to touch Maria's face as she drank. The difference was immediate and remarkable. Instead of the frantic gulping that often led to spit-up, Emma drank calmly and steadily. My God, Mr. Harrison breathed, watching in amazement. She's actually drinking. She was so hungry, Maria said softly, smoothing the baby's fine dark hair. But her little stomach was too upset to eat properly. Sometimes babies need extra patience and gentleness. As Emma continued to drink, Maria glanced around at the makeshift nursery. Despite the expensive furniture and equipment, something was missing. The warmth and comfort that made a space feel like home for a baby. The room felt clinical, temporary, like a hospital ward rather than a place where a child could feel safe and loved. Mr. and Mrs. Harrison, Maria said carefully, I know this is not my place to ask, but are you certain that giving her away is what you want? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Mrs. Harrison's eyes filled with fresh tears, and Mr. Harrison's jaw tightened with emotion he was trying to control. We don't have a choice, Mrs. Harrison whispered. We're not parent material. Look at what just happened. You walked in and immediately knew what to do. We've been failing her for 3 weeks. Maria continued to feed Emma, choosing her words carefully. Learning to care for a baby is not about being perfect from the beginning. It is about love and patience and willingness to keep trying. You called me in because you wanted to help her. That tells me your hearts are in the right place." The room fell silent except for the soft sounds of Emma drinking her bottle. Outside, the storm was beginning to pass and the first hints of dawn were creeping through the clouds. Maria realized that this long night was coming to an end, but the real story was just beginning. The morning sun was streaming through the penthouse windows when Maria finally finished feeding Emma and gently patted her back until she produced a satisfied burp. The baby's eyes were heavy with contentment, and for the first time in weeks, she seemed truly peaceful. Mrs. Harrison had fallen asleep in the chair by the fireplace, exhausted from weeks of sleepless nights, while Mr. Harrison sat watching Maria with an expression of wonder and deep thought. "Maria," he said quietly, careful not to wake his wife or the baby, "what you've done tonight. I don't know how to thank you. We were at our wits' end." Maria settled Emma more comfortably in her arms, marveling at how perfectly the tiny body fit against her chest. "There is no need for thanks, Mr. Harrison. Any mother would do the same." "But that's just it," he replied, running his hands through his disheveled hair. "Catherine and I were not natural parents. We don't have those instincts. We can manage billion-dollar companies and navigate complex business deals, but we can't figure out how to comfort a crying baby." "These things can be learned," Maria said gently. "Being a parent is not something you know automatically. It takes practice and patience." Mr. Harrison was quiet for a long moment, watching Emma sleep peacefully in Maria's arms. "Can I ask you something? How many children do you have?" "4 of my own," Maria replied with a soft smile. "All grown now. And 6 grandchildren. The youngest is just a year older than this little one. And you raised them all while working?" "My husband died when my youngest was only 3, Maria said matter-of-factly. "I worked as a housekeeper during the day and cleaned office buildings at night. It was hard, but love makes you strong." Mr. Harrison nodded slowly, and Maria could see him processing this information. "The adoption agency wants to place Emma as soon as possible. They say it's better for babies to be settled into their permanent homes quickly. What does your heart tell you?" Maria asked. Before Mr. Harrison could answer, Mrs. Harrison stirred in her chair, slowly opening her eyes. For a moment she looked confused, as if she had forgotten where she was and why. Then her gaze fell on Emma, still sleeping peacefully in Maria's arms, and the events of the night came flooding back. "She's so quiet," Mrs. Harrison whispered in amazement. "I haven't seen her this calm since she arrived. She just needed to feel safe and have her belly full of the right food," Maria explained. "Babies are not so complicated. They need food, comfort, love, and sleep. When those needs are met, they are usually happy." Mrs. Harrison stood and walked over to where Maria sat, looking down at Emma with an expression that was difficult to read. May I hold her?" Maria carefully transferred the sleeping baby to Mrs. Harrison's arms, showing her how to support Emma's head and neck. "Keep her close to your heart," Maria advised. "Babies can hear heartbeats, and it reminds them of being safe in the womb." To everyone's surprise, Emma remained peaceful in Mrs. Harrison's arms. The baby's tiny hand opened and closed against the silk of Mrs. Harrison's robe, and a small, contented sigh escaped her lips. "She's so small," Mrs. Harrison whispered, tears beginning to flow again. "She fits right here like she belongs." Mr. Harrison moved to stand beside his wife, reaching out to touch Emma's tiny hand. "Catherine, look at her. Really look at her. I see her, Richard. I see her every day. I see Jennifer in her face and her eyes. That's what makes this so hard." "No," Mr. Harrison said softly. "I mean, really look at her. Not as Jennifer's daughter. Not as a responsibility we didn't ask for, but as Emma. As herself." Mrs. Harrison gazed down at the sleeping baby, and Maria watched as something shifted in her expression. The panic and overwhelming fear began to give way to something else, a tenderness that surprised even Mrs. Harrison herself. "She has such long eyelashes," Mrs. Harrison murmured. "And her fingers are so perfect, so tiny." "Mrs. Harrison," Maria said carefully, "may I ask you something? When you think about giving Emma to another family, how does that make you feel?" Mrs. Harrison was quiet for a long time, gently swaying with the baby in her arms. "Terrified," she finally admitted. "Not terrified of keeping her, but terrified of letting her go. What if they don't love her enough? What if they don't understand that she needs extra patience? What if they give up on her like the night nurse did?" "Then why give her away?" Maria asked simply. Because we don't know how to be parents, Mrs. Harrison said, but her voice lacked conviction. Look at what happened tonight. We were completely helpless. But you weren't helpless, Maria pointed out. When Emma was in distress, you didn't give up. You called for help. That is what good parents do. They find solutions, they ask for support when they need it. Mr. Harrison sat on the arm of his wife's chair, putting his hand on her shoulder. Maria, can I ask you something else? If we decided to keep Emma, if we wanted to learn how to be her parents, could you help us? The request hung in the air, and Maria felt her heart skip a beat. She looked at the wealthy couple, both still in their expensive clothes from the night before, both looking vulnerable and uncertain in a way that money couldn't fix. Then she looked at Emma, sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks. You want me to teach you how to care for her? Maria asked. More than that, Mrs. Harrison said, looking up from the baby to meet Maria's eyes. We want you to help us become a family. We can afford to hire any kind of help we need. Professional nannies, child development experts, the best of everything. But Emma doesn't need the most expensive care. She needs love and patience and someone who understands babies. She needs someone like you. Maria thought about her own life, about her small apartment and her other job cleaning offices at night. She thought about her own grown children, who were doing well but could always use extra help. She thought about her mother in Guatemala, whose medical bills were becoming harder to manage each month. What exactly are you asking me to do? Maria inquired. Move in, Mr. Harrison said without hesitation. Become Emma's nanny, but more than that. Help us learn how to be her parents. Stay with us until we feel confident that we can give her everything she needs. We'll triple your current salary, Mrs. Harrison added, plus room and board, full health benefits, and anything else you need. We'll set up a proper nursery, get the right equipment, whatever it takes. Maria looked around the opulent penthouse, imagining what it would be like to live in such luxury. But more importantly, she looked at Emma and imagined what it would be like to help this tiny girl grow and thrive in a home where she was wanted and loved. There would be conditions, Maria said slowly. If I do this, if I help you become Emma's parents, then you must promise me that you will never give up on her. Not when she's sick, not when she's difficult, not when being parents gets hard. Because it will get hard. We promise, both Harrison said simultaneously. And you must promise that you will learn, really learn, how to care for her yourselves. I will not be her mother substitute. I will be her teacher and your teacher, but you must be her parents. We promise that too, Mrs. Harrison said, holding Emma a little closer. Maria made her decision. Then yes, I will help you. But first let me call my sister to explain that I won't be coming home today. And then, Mr. Harrison, we need to go shopping for the right formula and some other things Emma needs. As the sun rose higher over Manhattan, casting golden light through the penthouse windows, Maria began to make a mental list of everything that needed to be done. She would need to arrange for someone else to cover her other cleaning jobs. She would need to move her essential belongings from Queens. She would need to educate the Harrisons about every aspect of baby care, from feeding schedules to diaper changing, to the importance of routine. But most importantly, she would need to help them understand that becoming parents wasn't about being perfect or having all the answers. It was about showing up every day with love and commitment, ready to learn and grow alongside the child they were raising. Looking at Emma, still sleeping peacefully in her new mother's arms, Maria smiled. This was going to be the most important job of her life. 3 weeks later, the Harrison penthouse had transformed into something unrecognizable. Gone were the pristine white carpets, replaced with soft, washable rugs in warm colors. The sharp corners of expensive furniture had been baby-proofed with cushioned guards. Toys, not expensive designer pieces, but practical, colorful items that actually engaged a baby's developing mind, were scattered throughout the living spaces. But the most remarkable transformation was in the people themselves. Maria stood in the newly renovated nursery, watching Mrs. Harrison, Catherine as she now insisted Maria call her, change Emma's diaper with growing confidence. Just 3 weeks ago, Catherine had been terrified to touch the baby without Maria's supervision. Now she chatted softly to Emma as she worked, explaining each step in a gentle voice that made the baby giggle and wave her tiny hands. There we go, sweetheart, Catherine cooed, fastening the fresh diaper, all clean and dry. Are you ready for your bottle? Emma responded with happy gurgling sounds and reached up toward Catherine's face with her small fists. Catherine leaned down to let the baby touch her cheek. laughing when Emma grabbed hold of a strand of her hair. "She's getting so much stronger," Catherine said to Maria, carefully lifting Emma from the changing table. "Look how well she holds her head up now." "Babies grow fast when they feel loved and secure," Maria replied, watching the natural interaction between Catherine and Emma with satisfaction. "She has gained almost a full pound since I arrived. It hadn't been easy. The first week had been filled with tears from all three adults as they struggled to establish routines and build confidence. Richard had been clumsy with bottles and terrified of hurting Emma during bath time. Catherine had panicked every time Emma cried, convinced she was doing something wrong. Maria had worked around the clock, demonstrating techniques during the day and getting up for night feedings to ensure everyone got enough rest to function, but gradually, the pieces had begun to fall into place. Richard had discovered that he had a talent for getting Emma to sleep, walking with her through the penthouse while humming classical music under his breath. Catherine had mastered the art of reading Emma's different cries, knowing instinctively when she was hungry versus when she simply wanted attention. "Maria, could you come here for a moment?" Richard's voice called from the living room. "I want to show you something." Maria and Catherine, carrying Emma, made their way to where Richard sat on the floor surrounded by paperwork. This was another change. The billionaire CEO who had once conducted all his business from his imposing home office now worked wherever Emma was, unwilling to be separated from her for long periods. "I've been doing research," Richard said, holding up a thick folder. "About adoption procedures, about what it takes to make this official?" Catherine's breath caught. "Richard, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that I want to adopt Emma formally. I want her to be our daughter legally, not just practically. I want her to have our name, to inherit everything we have, to never have to wonder if she truly belongs with us." Maria felt tears spring to her eyes as she watched Catherine sink into a chair, still holding Emma, her face cycling through disbelief, joy, and overwhelming emotion. "Are you sure?" Catherine whispered. "Really sure? Because once we do this, there's no going back. She becomes our responsibility forever." "Catherine, look around you," Richard said, gesturing to the transformed space. "Look at how our life has changed in just 3 weeks. I canceled a business trip to Tokyo because I didn't want to miss Emma's first smile. You turned down the charity board position because you wanted to spend more time with her. We rearranged our entire world around this little girl, and it feels right. It feels like the most important thing we've ever done." Emma chose that moment to let out a delighted squeal, reaching toward Richard with her arms outstretched. He immediately moved to take her from Catherine, lifting her high above his head while she giggled with joy. "Besides," Richard continued, settling Emma against his chest, "she's already got us wrapped around her tiny finger. Last night when she couldn't sleep, I found myself reading quarterly reports to her because she seemed to like the sound of my voice." "Did it work?" Maria asked, laughing, like a charm. "She was asleep before I got through the first page of profit margins." Catherine wiped tears from her eyes, reaching out to touch Emma's soft cheek. "What about the adoption agency?" "They're expecting us to finalize placement with another family." "I already called them," Richard said. "Explained that we've decided to keep Emma ourselves. They need to do a home study and some interviews. But since we're blood relatives and have been caring for her successfully, they don't anticipate any problems." Maria watched the scene unfold with deep satisfaction. Over the past 3 weeks, she had seen these two people discover parts of themselves they never knew existed. Richard, who had been known for his ruthless business tactics and demanding perfectionism, had become gentle and patient with Emma, celebrating her tiniest achievements as if they were major victories. Catherine, who had once lived a carefully scheduled life focused on appearance and social obligations, now measured her days by Emma's feeding times and nap schedules, finding joy in the simple pleasure of making a baby laugh. "There's something else," Richard said, his tone becoming more serious. "Maria, we need to talk about your role in all of this." Maria felt her stomach tighten with concern. Had she overstepped somehow? Had she become too involved in their family decisions? "I know we originally discussed this as a temporary arrangement," Richard continued. "You were going to help us learn how to care for Emma and then return to your previous life. But Catherine and I have been talking, and we don't want this to be temporary." "What do you mean?" Maria asked carefully. Catherine took Emma back from Richard and moved to sit beside Maria on the couch. "We mean that we want you to be part of our family permanently. Not just as Emma's nanny, but as, I don't know what to call it." Our parenting partner? Emma's grandmother figure? We can't imagine raising her without you, Richard added. You've taught us so much, but more than that, you've shown us what it means to love a child unconditionally. Emma lights up when she sees you. You're not just caring for her. You're part of who she's becoming. Maria felt her emotions threatening to overwhelm her. In the 3 weeks she had lived in the penthouse, she had grown to love Emma as if she were her own granddaughter. The idea of leaving, of going back to her old life and seeing Emma only occasionally, had been weighing heavily on her mind. What exactly are you proposing? She asked. Live here permanently, Catherine said. Help us raise Emma. We'll formalize everything legally. You'll have job security, benefits, a retirement plan, college funds for your own children and grandchildren. But more than that, you'll be part of Emma's life always. We're not asking you to be our employee, Richard added. We're asking you to be family. Maria looked at Emma, who was now drowsily sucking on her fist, clearly ready for her afternoon nap. The baby had thrived under the combined care of 3 adults who adored her, each bringing different strengths to her upbringing. Maria provided the practical knowledge and intuitive understanding of children's needs. Catherine brought warmth and nurturing, along with a growing confidence in her maternal abilities. Richard offered security and unwavering devotion, plus a surprising talent for silly voices and peekaboo games. My own children, Maria said slowly. They're grown, but they still need help sometimes. My mother in Guatemala, she's sick and needs expensive medicine. Whatever your family needs, we'll make sure they have it, Richard said without hesitation. Your children will have access to the best schools, the best health care, whatever opportunities they want to pursue. Your mother will get the finest medical care available. But more importantly, Catherine added, your family will always be welcome here. We want Emma to know her extended family, to understand that families can be big and complicated and wonderful in many different ways. Maria thought about her sister's cramped apartment in Queens, about working multiple jobs to make ends meet, about the constant worry about money that had shaped her entire adult life. Then she looked around the penthouse, transformed from a cold showplace into a warm home filled with love and laughter. But mostly, she looked at Emma, who had opened her eyes and was gazing up at Maria with the trusting, adoring expression that babies reserve for the people who make them feel safe and loved. Yes, Maria said simply. Yes, I would be honored to help you raise this beautiful girl. As if she understood the significance of the moment, Emma reached up and grabbed Maria's finger with her tiny hand, holding on tight while Catherine and Richard moved closer to form a circle around her. In that moment, Maria realized that families weren't always formed in traditional ways. Sometimes they came together through crisis and need, through love and commitment, through the simple recognition that some bonds transcend biology and circumstances. Looking at the 3 adults and 1 baby who had somehow become her world, Maria knew she was exactly where she belonged. 6 months had passed since that transformative night, when Maria first held a crying Emma in her arms. The penthouse had settled into a rhythm of family life that would have been unimaginable to any of them a year ago. Emma, now a chubby, happy 8-month-old, was sitting in her high chair in the kitchen, banging a wooden spoon against her tray and babbling in the universal language of babies who are excited about everything. Today was special for several reasons. The adoption papers had finally been finalized, making Emma officially Emma Catherine Harrison. Richard had taken the entire day off work, something that would have been unthinkable in his pre-Emma life. Catherine had canceled her standing lunch with the wives of other tech executives, and Maria was preparing something that she hadn't made in years, a meal from her childhood in Guatemala, dishes that carried the weight of memory and love. Abuela Maria, what's that smell? Emma gurgled, reaching toward the stove where Maria was stirring a pot of pipián, a traditional Guatemalan stew that had been her grandmother's specialty. Maria smiled at the nickname that had evolved naturally. Emma couldn't say Maria yet, but she had started calling her abuela, grandmother in Spanish, and the name had stuck with the whole family. This, little one, is the food of my people, Maria said, lifting the wooden spoon to taste the rich, complex sauce made from roasted seeds, chilies, and spices. Today we celebrate not just your adoption, but also where you come from, all the places you come from. Richard looked up from where he sat at the kitchen island, reviewing legal documents one final time. Maria, You didn't have to go to so much trouble. We could have ordered from that fancy restaurant Catherine likes. This is not trouble, Maria replied firmly. This is love. And besides, it's important for Emma to understand that families can honor their traditions while creating new ones. Catherine entered the kitchen carrying a vase of fresh flowers, not the expensive orchids that used to arrive weekly, but cheerful daisies that Emma loved to look at. Her style had evolved too, from perfectly pressed designer suits to comfortable clothes that could withstand baby food stains and unexpected spit-up. It smells incredible in here, Catherine said, moving to kiss Emma's head before settling beside Richard. What can we do to help? You can tell me about your sister, Maria said quietly, continuing to stir the Peppian. About Jennifer. I've been thinking about her a lot today. The kitchen grew quiet except for Emma's happy babbling and the gentle bubbling of the stew. In the months since the adoption process began, they had spoken about Jennifer only in practical terms: medical history, legal documents, necessary information for the court proceedings. But they had never really talked about who she was as a person. Catherine's eyes filled with tears, as they always did when Jennifer was mentioned. She was so young, Catherine began, her voice barely above a whisper. Only 5 years younger than me, but sometimes it felt like decades. I was already established in my career when she was still in high school, struggling with everything. What was she struggling with? Maria asked gently, reducing the heat under the Peppian and moving to prepare the rice. Everything, really. Our parents died when she was 16, a plane crash while they were on vacation in Europe. I was 21, already living on my own, building my life with Richard. But Jennifer, she went to live with our aunt, who was kind but overwhelmed. Jennifer felt lost, abandoned, angry at the world. Richard reached over to take Catherine's hand. Tell her about the good parts, too. Catherine smiled through her tears. She was beautiful, and not just physically. She had this laugh that could light up a room. She was studying to be a teacher, because she wanted to help kids who felt lost like she had. When she found out she was pregnant, she was scared but determined to give Emma the childhood she felt she'd missed. Maria nodded, adding saffron to the rice until it turned a beautiful golden color. She sounds like a strong young woman. She was working at a daycare center and taking night classes, Catherine continued. Living in a tiny apartment, but she had decorated Emma's corner with such care. Hand-painted butterflies on the walls. A mobile she made from felt and embroidery thread. Everything was second-hand, but it was chosen with so much love. Why weren't you closer? Maria asked, not judgmentally but with genuine curiosity. Catherine was quiet for a long moment, watching Emma try to fit her entire fist in her mouth. I was selfish, she finally admitted. I was building this perfect life with Richard, and Jennifer represented all the messiness and pain of our past. Every time I saw her, I was reminded of losing our parents, of feeling helpless and scared. It was easier to send money occasionally than to actually be present in her life. I encouraged it, Richard added, his voice heavy with regret. I thought Catherine needed to focus on our future, not get dragged down by family obligations. I convinced her that helping Jennifer financially was enough. Maria turned from the stove to face them both, her expression serious but kind. You were young and dealing with your own grief. People make mistakes when they're hurting. But the mistake cost Jennifer and Emma, Catherine said, tears flowing freely now. If I had been a real sister to her, maybe she wouldn't have been working 2 jobs. Maybe she wouldn't have been driving home exhausted at midnight when that drunk driver hit her car. Maybe Emma would still have her mother. Emma, sensing the sadness in the room, made soft questioning sounds and reached toward Catherine. Without hesitation, Catherine lifted her from the high chair and held her close, breathing in the sweet baby scent that had become as necessary to her as air. Jennifer would be so proud of who Emma is becoming, Maria said firmly, and she would be grateful that Emma is growing up surrounded by so much love. You cannot change the past, but you can honor Jennifer's memory by being the best parents you can be to her daughter. Maria moved to the refrigerator and pulled out a small container she had prepared earlier. I made something special for Emma today too, she said, spooning a small portion of perfectly smooth mashed sweet potato into a tiny bowl. In Guatemala, we believe that when babies eat their first taste of traditional foods, they connect with their ancestors. She heated the sweet potato gently and tested the temperature before offering a small spoonful to Emma. The baby's eyes widened at the new flavor, and after a moment of consideration, she opened her mouth eagerly for more. "She likes it," Richard said, laughing as Emma banged her hands on her tray in approval. "Of course she does," Maria replied. "This is in her blood. Jennifer may be gone, but her heritage lives on in Emma. She's Guatemalan through me, American through you and Catherine, and something entirely new through the love that brought us all together." As if summoned by the mention of heritage, Maria's own daughter Carmen arrived for dinner, bringing with her Maria's two youngest grandchildren. Carmen had been skeptical at first about her mother's new living arrangement, worried that Maria was being taken advantage of by wealthy employers. But seeing the genuine love and respect between Maria and the Harrisons had gradually won her over. "Mama, it smells like Abuela Rosa's kitchen in here," Carmen said, embracing Maria warmly before moving to greet Emma, who squealed with delight at seeing her favorite playmate. "That's exactly what I was hoping for," Maria replied, stirring the Pepian one final time. "Today we're not just celebrating Emma's adoption. We're celebrating the blending of families, the mixing of traditions, the creation of something new and beautiful." As the extended family gathered around the dining table, Maria looked at the spread she had created. There was the Pepian, rich and complex with flavors that told the story of her homeland. There was perfectly seasoned rice, fresh tortillas made by hand, and a simple salad that balanced the hearty richness of the main dish. For Emma, there were several small portions of baby-appropriate foods, each prepared with the same care and attention as the adult meal. But what made Maria's heart swell was not the food itself, but the sight of everyone she loved gathered around one table. Richard was teaching Carmen's 6-year-old son how to properly hold Emma while she drank her bottle. Catherine was deep in conversation with Carmen about childhood development techniques. Emma was the center of attention, babbling happily as she sampled tiny tastes of different foods. "Before we eat," Richard said, standing and raising his water glass, "I want to make a toast." The table quieted, even Emma seeming to sense the solemnity of the moment. 6 months ago, Catherine and I thought we knew what our life was supposed to look like. We had our careers, our routines, our carefully planned future. We thought we were complete. He paused, looking down at Emma, who was reaching toward his glass with fascination. "We had no idea how empty our lives were until this little girl filled them with purpose and joy." He turned to Maria, "And we had no idea that opening our home to Emma would also mean opening our hearts to a woman who would teach us what it really means to be a family. Maria, you didn't just help us learn how to care for Emma. You helped us learn how to care for each other." Catherine stood as well, lifting her own glass. "To Jennifer, who gave us the greatest gift imaginable. To Maria, who taught us how to receive that gift with the love and respect it deserved. And to Emma, who has—" "She's right, you know," Maria said, wiping tears from her eyes. "Whatever happens with the business, whatever changes we have to make, Emma will be happy tomorrow, because she'll wake up in a house full of people who love her." Richard finally broke down completely, sobbing with the release of weeks of accumulated stress and fear. Catherine wrapped her arms around him while Maria moved to hold both of them, and together they grieved for the future they had planned while simultaneously celebrating the family they had built. "We'll figure it out," Catherine whispered. "All of it. Together." And sitting there in their living room, surrounded by Emma's artwork and the remnants of another family dinner, Maria knew they would. Because families weren't built on money or security or perfect plans. They were built on love and commitment, and the willingness to face whatever challenges came their way as a unit. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and difficult decisions and the hard work of rebuilding. But tonight they had each other, and a sleeping 2-year-old who believed that hugs could fix anything. It was more than enough. 1 year later, Maria stood in the small but cozy kitchen of their new home in Brooklyn, stirring a pot of Pepian just as she had done countless times in the penthouse. The kitchen was a fraction of the size of their previous one, with outdated appliances and worn countertops, but somehow it felt more like home than the luxury penthouse ever had. Through the window, she could see Emma playing in their tiny backyard, her dark hair catching the afternoon sunlight as she chased butterflies with the intense concentration that only 3-year-olds possessed. The yard was barely large enough for a small swing set and a vegetable garden, but Emma treated it like her own personal kingdom. "Abuela Maria." "Butterfly," Emma called out, pointing excitedly at an orange monarch that had landed on the tomato plants Maria had carefully tended all summer. Very beautiful little flower, Maria called back in Spanish. But don't touch. Just watch. The past year had been the most challenging of any of their lives, but also, in many ways, the most rewarding. Richard's company had indeed gone bankrupt, resulting in the loss of the penthouse, the luxury cars, and most of their financial assets. The legal proceedings had been lengthy and stressful, with Richard taking full responsibility for the software, flaws and working tirelessly to ensure that affected patients received compensation. But something unexpected had emerged from the ashes of Richard's tech empire. While developing solutions for the software problems, he had created an entirely new approach to data security that had caught the attention of healthcare advocacy groups. Instead of building another profit-driven corporation, Richard had established a nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting patient privacy rights and helping smaller healthcare providers implement secure systems they could actually afford. The work paid a fraction of what Richard had earned as a tech billionaire, but he came home every evening energized rather than exhausted, excited to tell Catherine and Maria about the community clinic he had helped secure their data, or the rural hospital that could now safely store patient records without fear of breaches. Catherine had discovered her own calling as well. Her experience with Emma had ignited a passion for child development, and she was now halfway through a master's degree in early childhood education. She worked part-time at a local daycare center, bringing home stories about the children she taught with the same enthusiasm she had once reserved for charity galas and social events. The financial adjustment had been dramatic. They had moved from the Manhattan penthouse to a modest 3-bedroom house in a diverse Brooklyn neighborhood, where children played in the streets and neighbors knew each other's names. Maria had her own bedroom and bathroom, smaller than the servants' quarters in the penthouse but decorated with photos of her extended family and Emma's latest artwork. They shopped at regular grocery stores instead of having organic produce delivered. They drove a used minivan instead of luxury sedans. Emma's clothes came from department stores rather than designer boutiques, and her toys were often handmade by Maria or picked up at garage sales. But Emma was thriving in ways that had nothing to do with material wealth. She spoke 3 languages fluently: English, Spanish, and the universal language of a child who knew she was deeply loved. She could identify vegetables in their garden, help Maria make tortillas from scratch, and had recently learned to read simple books to her stuffed animals. More importantly, she was growing up with an understanding of different kinds of families and different ways of living. Their neighbors included immigrant families from 6 different countries, single mothers working multiple jobs, elderly couples who had lived in the neighborhood for decades, and young professionals just starting their careers. "Mama! Daddy home!" Emma suddenly shrieked, abandoning her butterfly, watching to run toward the front gate. Maria looked up to see Richard walking up their front path, his briefcase replaced by a canvas messenger bag, and his business suits traded for khakis and polo shirts. He scooped Emma up in his arms, spinning her around while she giggled with delight. "How was your day, princess?" he asked, settling her on his hip as they walked toward the kitchen. "I helped Abuela with the tomatoes and I saw 3 butterflies, and Mrs. Chen taught me how to count to 10 in Chinese," Emma announced, clearly pleased with her accomplishments. "Wow, that's quite a day," Richard said, kissing her forehead before setting her down so she could return to her outdoor adventures. "And how was your day?" Maria asked, noting the particular brightness in Richard's expression that meant he had good news to share. "Amazing," Richard replied, grabbing a glass of water and settling at their small kitchen table. "The grant came through. The foundation is going to fund our pilot program in rural Alabama. We'll be able to provide free data security systems to 15 community health centers over the next 2 years. Maria smiled, stirring the Peppian and tasting it for seasoning. "Catherine will be so excited. This is the project you've been working on for months. It means we'll be traveling more, visiting the communities we're working with. I was thinking—" Richard paused, watching Emma through the window. "I was thinking it might be good for Emma to see different parts of the country, to understand how people live in small towns and rural areas." "She would love that," Maria agreed. "And it would be good for all of us to remember that there are many ways to build a meaningful life." The front door opened and Catherine's voice called out, "I'm home. And I brought company." Emma immediately abandoned her butterfly watching again and ran inside, followed by Catherine and Carmen, who was carrying her youngest daughter on her hip. Maria, You'll never guess what happened at the daycare today, Catherine said, setting down her school bag and immediately moving to help Emma wash her hands. Remember that little boy I told you about, the one whose parents were worried about his speech development? Miguel, Maria said, nodding. The one who only speaks Spanish at home. That's him. Well, today he finally started talking in English, and do you know what his first full sentence was? I want to cook with Señora Catherine like Emma cooks with her abuela. Maria felt her heart swell with pride and joy. One of the unexpected benefits of their new life was watching Catherine discover her gift for working with children from diverse backgrounds. Her experience raising Emma bilingually, combined with Maria's cultural knowledge, had made her particularly effective with immigrant families at the daycare. His parents want to know if you would teach them some of your recipes, Catherine continued. Miguel keeps talking about the magic food that Emma's abuela makes. Of course, Maria said without hesitation. Food is love in any language. As the extended family gathered around their small table for dinner, Maria looked at the faces surrounding her and felt a profound sense of completion. Richard was helping Emma cut her food while discussing the day's butterfly sightings with the seriousness he had once reserved for board meetings. Catherine was braiding Carmen's daughter's hair while simultaneously helping Carmen with her English homework. Emma was chattering in a mixture of Spanish and English, seamlessly switching between languages as she told stories about her day. The house was small and the furniture was second-hand, but it was filled with the sounds of family life, laughter, conversation, the clink of silverware against dishes, Emma's running commentary on everything happening around her. Before we eat, Richard said, standing to get everyone's attention, I want to say something. The table quieted, though Emma continued to hum softly while arranging her food in patterns on her plate. 3 years ago, if someone had told me that losing everything I thought I wanted would lead to finding everything I actually needed, I would have thought they were crazy. Richard's voice was thick with emotion. I thought success meant accumulating wealth and building an empire. I thought family was something you fit in around the edges of your real life. He reached over to ruffle Emma's hair, then looked directly at Maria. I thought employees were people you paid to make your life easier, not people who could teach you what it means to truly live. Richard, Maria started, but he held up his hand. Let me finish. Maria, you didn't just save Emma that first night when she was crying. You saved all of us. You? 2 years had passed since that fateful night when Maria first calmed a crying Emma. The penthouse had evolved into a true family home, with child-proofed corners, colorful artwork hanging at toddler eye level, and the constant soundtrack of a busy, happy household. Emma, now a precocious 2-year-old with an impressive vocabulary in both English and Spanish, had long ago established herself as the center of everyone's universe. On this particular evening, Maria stood in the kitchen preparing what had become a weekly tradition, Sunday dinner for the extended family. The guest list had grown over the months to include not just Carmen and her children, but also Richard's business partner David and his wife, Catherine's college roommate who was going through a difficult divorce, and occasionally neighborhood families that Emma had befriended during their daily walks to the park. Abuela Maria, Emma hungry, the toddler announced, tugging on Maria's apron while dragging her beloved stuffed elephant behind her. Dinner will be ready soon. Little flower, Maria replied in Spanish, then repeated in English for the benefit of Richard, who was still learning. Why don't you help me set the table? Emma clapped her hands in delight and immediately began the serious business of placing napkins at each seat. Her little face screwed up in concentration as she tried to fold them the way Maria had taught her. Catherine entered the kitchen carrying a bouquet of drawings. Emma had made that afternoon, abstract scribbles that Emma insisted were pictures of the whole family, including Abuela's Guatemala and Daddy's office building. The refrigerator had long ago been covered with such masterpieces, and Catherine had started keeping special albums of Emma's artwork. Richard's running late, Catherine said, checking her phone. Something about an emergency board meeting. Maria frowned slightly. Over the past 2 years, Richard had become remarkably good at setting boundaries between work and family time. It was unusual for him to miss Sunday dinner, especially without more notice. Is everything okay with the business? Maria asked. I'm not sure, Catherine admitted. He's been stressed lately, taking more calls than usual, staying up late reading reports. He says it's nothing to worry about, but She was interrupted by the sound of the front door opening and Richard's voice calling out, "I'm home. Sorry, I'm late." Emma immediately abandoned her napkin-folding duties and ran toward the entrance, her little feet pattering across the hardwood floors. "Daddy, Daddy! Look what I made!" The sound of Richard's laughter echoed through the penthouse, followed by Emma's delighted giggles as he presumably swept her up in his arms. But when they appeared in the kitchen doorway moments later, Maria noticed something different about Richard's expression. Despite his smile, there was a tightness around his eyes, a tension in his shoulders that spoke of difficult news. "What's wrong?" Catherine asked immediately, her maternal instincts extending to her husband as much as her daughter. Richard set Emma down and handed her the small bag of books he had stopped to buy on his way home, another tradition that had developed over the months. "Let me get changed first," he said. "Then we'll talk." But Emma had other plans. Still holding one of her new books, she looked up at Richard with the serious expression she wore when she had something important to say. "Daddy sad?" she asked, reaching up to touch his face with her small hand. Richard's composure cracked for just a moment, and Maria saw his eyes fill with unshed tears. He knelt down to Emma's level, taking her tiny hand in both of his. "Daddy's just tired, sweetheart," he said softly, "but seeing you always makes everything better." Emma studied his face for a long moment with the intuitive wisdom that children sometimes possess. Then she wrapped her arms around his neck and whispered loudly, "I love you, Daddy. Emma, make it better." Richard closed his eyes and held his daughter close, and Maria felt her heart clench with concern. Whatever was happening, it was serious enough to shake a man who had faced down corporate raiders and hostile takeovers without flinching. During dinner, Richard made an effort to participate in the usual family conversations, helping Emma with her food and listening to Carmen's stories about her job at the community center. But Maria, who had become expert at reading the subtle dynamics of her adopted family, could see that his mind was elsewhere. It wasn't until after Emma had been bathed and read to sleep that the three adults finally gathered in the living room to talk. Richard sat heavily in his favorite chair, the one positioned so he could see into Emma's room when her door was open. "The company's in trouble," he said without preamble. "Serious trouble." Catherine moved to perch on the arm of his chair, her hand automatically going to his shoulder. "What kind of trouble?" "Remember that new software platform we've been developing for the past 3 years? The one that was supposed to revolutionize patient care management?" Richard ran his hands through his hair, a gesture Maria had learned meant he was trying to find words for something difficult. "We discovered a critical security flaw. Patient data could be compromised. Private medical information exposed. We have to shut everything down, recall the software, rebuild from scratch." Maria felt her stomach drop. She didn't understand all the technical details, but she knew enough about Richard's business to realize this was catastrophic. "How bad is it financially?" Catherine asked quietly. "Bad, very bad. We're looking at lawsuits, government investigations, the loss of every major contract we've signed. I may have to declare bankruptcy." The words hung in the air like a physical weight. Maria thought about all the ways their lives could change, about the penthouse and the security and the future that Emma had always known. "What does this mean for us?" Catherine asked, and Maria heard the fear in her voice that she was trying to hide. "It means we'll probably lose everything," Richard said bluntly. "The penthouse, the cars, most of our investments. I'll have to sell whatever I can to pay legal fees and try to compensate the clients who were affected." Maria watched Catherine process this information, saw her cycling through shock, fear, and then something that looked like determination. "Okay," Catherine said simply. "Then we'll figure it out." "Catherine, you don't understand," Richard said, his voice breaking. "We won't be able to maintain this lifestyle. We won't be able to afford the private schools we talked about for Emma, the travel, the opportunities we wanted to give her." "And?" Catherine asked, genuinely puzzled by his distress. Richard stared at his wife as if she had spoken in a foreign language. "And we won't be able to take care of Maria properly. We won't be able to honor the commitments we made to her family, to provide the security and support we promised." Maria felt tears spring to her eyes, not because of the financial implications, but because of Richard's anguish over his perceived failure to protect the people he loved. "Mr. Richard," she said gently, "may I tell you something?" He looked at her with the expression of a drowning man reaching for a life preserver. 2 years ago, You and Mrs. Catherine saved my life just as much as I helped save Emma's. Before I came here, I was working myself to death, cleaning offices at night and houses during the day. Always worried about money, always exhausted. I was missing my grandchildren growing up because I was too tired to enjoy them when I saw them. She moved to sit across from Richard, leaning forward to make sure he heard every word. You gave me a family, not just a job, not just financial security, but a real family. You made me Emma's grandmother, Catherine's friend, your trusted partner in raising that beautiful little girl. Do you think I care if we live in a penthouse or a tiny apartment? Do you think Emma will love you less if you drive a regular car instead of a luxury one? Catherine nodded emphatically. Richard, remember what our life was like before Emma? We had all the money in the world, but we were empty. We were successful and miserable. But Maria's family, Richard protested. Her mother's medical care, her children's education. We'll be fine, Maria interrupted firmly. My children are grown and capable. They don't need your money to succeed. They need your example of what it means to work hard and love deeply. And my mother? She's lived for 78 years without needing a billionaire's help. She needs my love and attention more than expensive doctors. Richard was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fireplace where Emma's drawings were displayed on the mantelpiece. I just wanted to give Emma everything, he said finally. I wanted her to have every advantage, every opportunity. She already has everything, Catherine said softly. She has parents who adore her, an abuela who teaches her about her heritage, cousins who play with her every week. She has a family who sits down to dinner together every night and reads her stories before bed. She has love, Richard. Everything else is just details. As if summoned by their conversation, Emma's voice came floating from her bedroom, not crying, but talking quietly to her stuffed animals as she sometimes did when she couldn't quite fall asleep. Elephant. Daddy said he's sad today, but Abuela Maria make good food and Mama read good stories and Emma give hugs. Daddy be happy tomorrow. The three adults sat in stunned silence, listening to their 2-year-old work through the emotional complexities of the day with the simple wisdom that children possess. Taught us that love isn't something you buy. It's something you cook into every meal, something you weave into daily routines, something you demonstrate through patience and presence and showing up even when it's hard. His voice broke slightly, and Catherine reached over to take his hand. You showed us that family isn't about blood or money or having perfect circumstances. It's about choosing to care for each other day after day, through good times and hard times and all the ordinary moments in between. Maria felt tears running down her cheeks as she looked around the table at these people who had become her heart. Emma, now 4 years old and still the most joyful person Maria had ever known. Catherine, who had transformed from a distant socialite into a warm, engaged mother and educator. Richard, who had learned that true success meant building people up rather than accumulating possessions. When I first came to your penthouse, Maria said, her voice shaking with emotion, I thought I was just taking a job. I thought I would teach you how to care for a baby and then return to my old life. She paused to wipe her eyes, laughing at herself for crying over happiness. But you taught me that families can be chosen, that love can grow in unexpected places, that sometimes losing everything material leads to finding everything spiritual. You gave me a granddaughter, she looked at Emma, who was now paying attention with the seriousness she reserved for important adult conversations, and a daughter and son, she looked at Catherine and Richard, and a home that has nothing to do with addresses or square footage. Emma, who had been listening intently despite her young age, suddenly stood on her chair and reached her arms toward Maria. Group hug, she declared. Family hug. And as they all gathered around their small kitchen table, arms wrapped around each other in a tangle of love and laughter, Maria realized that this was what she had been cooking into every meal for the past 3 years. Not just spices and flavors, but the essential ingredients of family, patience, forgiveness, commitment, and the unwavering belief that love could transform any circumstance into something beautiful. Looking at Richard's tears of joy as he held his chosen family close, Maria knew that this recipe, this perfect blend of unlikely people who had found each other through crisis and chosen to stay together through love, was the most important thing she had ever created. Outside, the sun was setting over their small Brooklyn neighborhood, casting golden light through their kitchen window and illuminating the faces of the family that had been seasoned by hardship and perfected by unconditional love. And in that moment, surrounded by the people who had taught her that home was not a place but a feeling, Maria Santos knew that she was exactly where she belonged.